Society builders paved the way to a better world, to a better day. A united approach to building a new society. Join a conversation for social transformation. Society builders. Woo.
Society Builders with your host, Dwayne Varon. Welcome to another exciting episode of Society Builders, and thanks for joining the conversation for social transformation. Today's episode is a special episode. It's our annual episode exploring themes in the Ridvan messages of the Universal House of Justice. And this time, of course, we'll be studying the most recent Ridvan message, the message of 2025, still hot off the press. Remember, the views I share here are not intended to substitute for your own study of this message. It's designed to help us all explore the themes a little further. And also, remember that I speak with no authority on this topic. My views are no more or less important than yours. Together, we're simply exploring. So without further ado, let's dive in. Now, the Ridvan messages of the Universal House of Justice are our best tool for understanding the past, present, and future. They review and cheer our accomplishments of the past year. They give us new perspective on the condition of the world and on our Baha'i communities at present. And they give us a glimpse of the year to come. And we're going to explore all of this today. But I want to start with the present, and more specifically, on how the Universal House of Justice describes the state of the world at large. Now, remember, over the course of the past 3 years, we've often explored how the House of Justice views the state of the world. And consistently, they have painted a picture that is truly dark and ominous. So it's no surprise that this message again frames the state of the world in this way. Just listen to the picture they paint. They talk about the gloom of a stormy sky, a tempest raging the world. Now, this is a relatively short message, and their description of this dark state of the world isn't as extensive as it's been in previous messages. But in my opinion, it's simply shorthand for saying, hey, all that doom and gloom that we talked about in our last messages, wow, all that still applies. So the world's condition remains dark, very dark. Now, they contrast this dark state of the world with the bright example of Baha'i communities. So against the gloom of a stormy sky, how bright the light that gleams from your devoted efforts. So here you have this contrast between the dark and the bright. And even as the tempest rages in the world, the havens that will shelter humanity are being built in countries, regions, and clusters. So here you have this haven sheltering against the raging storm. So this gives us comfort in the midst of the chaos that surrounds us. It gives us clarity and focus. Now, much of the message really highlights our achievements, and this is a very warm letter with lots of feel-good moments, particularly, I think, if you live in the highlands of Bolivia or in the outer suburbs of Sydney, which get specific honorable mentions here. I mean, what a great honor for these communities to be showcased like this before the entire Baha'i world. It's like being recipients of the Medal of Honor. So kudos to these communities. Hopefully, in a future episode, I can track down some believers in these communities so we can hear their stories. But what a great honor. But the honor is not just theirs, it's all of ours, because you can see in reading this message that the House of Justice is very, very happy with the entire Baha'i world. The headline here is in the opening sentence where they say, through shining examples of noble endeavor, the vision offered by the faith is filling more and more hearts with hope. So that's a huge pat on the back for all of us. But it's much more than a pat on the back. It's telling us something specifically, something incredibly powerful about the fruit of our achievements here. And specifically, it's that the faith is filling more and more hearts with hope. Why do they focus on hope specifically here? I mean, this is a very specific word, right? They could have just said that our noble endeavors are delivering great results, but they specify hope. And to be clear, I want to remind you of a key phrase from the Universal House of Justice's message last year in Ridvan of 2024. On that occasion, they call on us specifically to build communities that offer hope in place of despair, unity in place of conflict. So a year ago, they gave us a very specific summons here. In part, it was communities that offer hope in place of despair. And in this year's message, they are commending us on this front specifically, telling us that we are succeeding in filling more and more hearts with hope. So I believe that there is a link between their summons here last year and their commendation to us here this year. And it's all around this construct of hope. So it always feels good to be responding to the call of the House of Justice. And this time, it all centers around this construct of hope. So let's explore this construct of hope a little further. Now, this word hope is very meaningful to me personally, and I want to give you a little bit of background on why this word really stands out to me in the message. I mean, it's a little bit of a digression, but it's an interesting story. In 1989, at the peak of the Cold War, I was part of a delegation of Baha'i youth that were invited to the then Soviet Union. Now, this was a very, very big deal because in those days, it was almost impossible for people to travel from Western countries into the Soviet Union behind the Iron Curtain. And imagine being invited officially as a Baha'i delegation. I mean, it was truly unprecedented stuff. The background to how this opportunity came about is that there was a Soviet delegation that was meeting with some of their American counterparts on the island of Maui in Hawaii. This was all high-level diplomacy stuff. But the Baha'is of Maui volunteered to help with the kitchen and catering services for this official delegation. And as fate would have it, some of the Soviet delegates ended up conversing with the Baha'i youth that were there as part of this catering volunteer work. And these Russian delegates were truly blown away by these youth, and more specifically, by the ideas that they were sharing about the path to world peace. Naturally, these youth would have been studying the recent message of the Universal House of Justice just a few years earlier that we call the promise of world peace. So they had a very clear sense of some really powerful ideas on this path to peace. And these delegates, these Soviet delegates, were so impressed that they invited these youth to come to the Soviet Union to share these views with the youth in their country. And so this incredible opportunity was born. Now, this was all very high-level stuff. In fact, originally, we were supposed to meet with Mikhail Gorbachev himself. That's how high-level it was. That meeting, unfortunately, didn't materialize because Gorbachev ended up having all these high-level summits with Ronald Reagan, summits which brought about the greatest transformation in international affairs in my lifetime, but which occurred at the exact same time as the trip which we had scheduled into the Soviet Union. So that's what blew that meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev. But we did meet with lots of very high-level dignitaries. So going back, this Hawaiian Baha'i community ended up forming a delegation of youth to travel to the then Soviet Union at the invitation of these Soviet delegates. And fortunately, I was selected as one of the 40 or so youth delegates that were assembled from around the Baha'i world. Now, this entire trip was one continuous miracle, and I have hundreds of stories to tell. The opportunities were truly unprecedented. For example, one of my best memories is that we got to go on television the first time the faith had been mentioned on television there. In fact, our interviewer actually embraced the faith following the interview He went on to become a true champion for the cause there. But again, I'm digressing. Now, the most important part of our trip was our travel to a town deep in the interior called Kazan. And this was a big part of the very reason we were invited there in the first place, because Kazan had very, very serious problems with youth gangs. And I'm not talking about cool gangs like the type that wear cool sneakers or really cool hats. This was truly terrifying stuff, like youth setting off bombs, setting fires to buildings. I mean, this was truly, truly horrific and terrifying stuff. And the Russian delegation decided that maybe the youth in Kazan would benefit from hearing these Baha'i perspectives. Now, I got to tell you, as cool as this all sounds, we were truly terrified. We were afraid of these youth leaders. In fact, our first stop in Kazan was a meeting that our official host had organized for us to confer with the youth gang leaders of Kazan. I mean, we were scared to death, and we truly felt way out of our depths for this. Now, on to the point of my whole story here. So the conditions in Kazan were truly desperate. The youth were truly disillusioned. And here we were going to meet with these gang leaders. But we honestly didn't have a clue what to say to them. I mean, we felt so overwhelmed. So the NSA of the Baha'is of Hawaii wrote to the Universal House of Justice, seeking their guidance, specifically on what the message of this delegation of Baha'i youth should be. And the response from the House of Justice centered on a single word. Their response said, focus on hope. That was it. Focus on hope. So this taught me something, that our response to truly desperate conditions, that our response to disillusionment is to focus on hope. I mean, it was such an incredible trip. And in fact, at a conference a year later in Moscow, again, after this country had gone through enormous pain and a lot of disillusionment, the Universal House of Justice wrote to the delegates at this conference, and again, they emphasized this word, hope. They commended the activities of this new nascent community, and they highlighted that this community had emerged as the quickener of hope in the hearts of the people. Again, in what was truly confusing times for people, the emphasis was on this message of hope. Now, I did a quick study of messages of the Universal House of Justice which make reference to this construct of hope, particularly in the context of this as something that we offer to humanity. And often you find that this construct is being used by the Universal House of Justice in places and times where disillusionment is rampant, which, by the way, I think perfectly describes the sentiment of our times, right? I mean, we are living in societies that are truly disillusioned, where disillusionment is rife and hope is needed. So many of these messages are to places that are really desperate. So, for example, in numerous messages to the Baha'is of Iran, the House of Justice consistently focuses on the Persian Baha'i community offering hope to their compatriots, referring to Baha'is as the embodiment of hope, as portals of hope, as a new source of hope for the future. So that's one kind of application to these difficult places where disillusionment is rife. But similarly, you see the House of Justice using this term under desperate conditions. So in November of 2020, for example, when we were all at the peak of despair, as COVID restructured life as we knew it across the planet, where disillusionment was rampant, where we feared for the future, in this context, the House of Justice talks about how hope has become a depleted resource. And they called on us to succeed in giving hope to those who know not where to find it in a world disoriented and adrift. In another message, they refer to our community as the last bastion of hope to a lost and wayward humanity. And in another message, they refer to us as an oasis of hope for the spiritual and material upliftment of a population. And in another message, they talk about how the prophecies of centuries reflecting on this theme of hope have now been given tangible form. And I love that reference to tangible form because this message also makes this kind of reference to the tangible. And they make clear that our efforts, however slow they may be, constitutes the one hope of a disillusioned humanity. So in this year's Ridvan message, this reference to this achievement of us filling hearts with hope is a big deal. It's a huge accomplishment, particularly as it comes in response to last year's call. So the message gives us new clarity in terms of our mission. We are in the business of hope, and we're delivering. Okay, going back to the House of Justice's review of the past year. Now, in terms of our specific achievements over this time period, the message really focuses, I think, on three key areas of achievement: activity at the cluster level, grassroots engagement with society, and on the global process of learning. So let's explore each of these three arenas of action. Now, the section on cluster activity is framed, I think, on three levels. First, there are clusters that are working at earlier stages in terms of their milestones. The seed yielding new green shoots. I mean, that's so poetic, right? And here they celebrate the contributions of pioneers who have responded at both the home front and abroad in impressive numbers. So there is an acknowledgement here, a pat on the back for the pioneers. So if you're a pioneer helping get a cluster in gear, congratulations. The House of Justice is clearly pleased with you. Then there are clusters with programs of growth, with renewed energy working towards higher milestones. And their path is clear. It's to advance towards those higher milestones. And then it's in the most advanced clusters, those with proven strength, that we're really starting to see the glimmerings of the society-building power of the faith at work. Now, it was interesting to me personally that the term that they use here is glimmerings, even for these most advanced clusters. And what that suggests, I think, is that we're still in the very early stages of society building. I mean, even our clusters with proven strength, our most advanced clusters, are only showing glimmerings. So imagine how exciting the future is, right? For me personally, again, this was very helpful in understanding just how much is still to unfold in this whole society building arena. Then in the next paragraph, they focus on our grassroots engagement with society. Now, let's think about this for a second. They celebrate grassroots engagement with social action. So what are they referring to here? What exactly do they mean here by grassroots? Is it the cluster, the local community, something else? Well, these are those glimmerings that they were talking about earlier. And while they say that it's something that's evident in the more advanced clusters, they specifically celebrate social action initiatives at the more intimate levels, in neighborhoods, villages, on single streets, or even high-density buildings. Here, they're painting a picture, one where the teachings are translated into tangible reality, a reality that people can see and touch. That's that reference that I was making to earlier. Think like your local neighborhood Baha'i children's classes, open to all and increasingly reflecting more and more participation from the wider community. And they celebrate some very specific social action initiatives in education, health, the environment, the empowerment of women, and the arts. And by the way, it's interesting that they make this reference to the arts as a form of social action. I mean, I had always thought of it as discourse, but they're clarifying here that it's also social action. This was new for me personally. I hadn't thought of it as social action before. I think that's something that we should reflect on because it may stimulate new ideas for us in our communities about how we might approach social action. And they also celebrate initiatives for social discourse, highlighting how civic leaders at the local level are not just turning to us for our Baha'i perspectives, but how they are increasingly seeking to collaborate in search of practical solutions. And while this kind of interaction with civic leaders is happening at the local level, the House of Justice also celebrates initiatives at the national and international level, which are attracting growing consideration and attention. And then, in terms of celebrating our achievements, they turn to our global process of learning. And here, as I noted earlier, they specifically commend the Baha'is in the highlands of Bolivia and in the suburbs of Sydney. And as I mentioned, I've got to do my homework to get a little bit more information about that for you in future episodes. Now, this part of the message is very interesting because it helps further explain what success in the learning arena looks like. They use a lot of terms to describe it here, including strategies and actions adaptable to every setting, that the approaches should be systematic, that they are organic, that they are all-embracing, that they create connections blossoming into dynamic relationships among families, among neighbors, among youth, and among all who are ready to be protagonists in this glorious undertaking. So that's a lot to reflect on. First, let's explore this idea that the strategies and actions are adaptable to every setting. Now, this is very interesting because you can read this two ways. You can focus on the adaptability part and read this as saying that this approach can't be one size fits all, that it's not a single formula that's rolling out everywhere, that it needs to be adapted. But you can also read it like the system works so well that it has the capacity to be rolled out everywhere, even if that requires adaptation. And of course, both of these statements are true. So we have a framework for action that is truly global, but we need to show the wisdom and flexibility of adapting it to local conditions. Now, the focus on the construct organic is something we've talked about a lot in previous episodes, how our capacity grows slowly and how we raise the resources we need as this capacity expands. And of course, this all-embracing character that they refer to recognize that we see ourselves as empowering others, all people, in rising to better their conditions and helping empower them to fulfill their aspirations. And this term aspirations, well, that's another key construct. That's something that we're seeing with growing frequency in the messages of the House of Justice. And their reference here to connections takes on a whole new meaning in light of their recent March 19th message, which focuses on the Baha'i home, which really adds a lot of color to describing this kind of interconnectedness. And then they make this beautiful reference to how all this helps raise up communities that brim with potential. Now, for me personally, this is a new phrase that I hadn't heard before, but it's a phrase I'm going to be using a lot from now on, how people can brim with potential. This is a metaphor of the capacity being so high that it's on the very, very lip of the cup. Like even a drop more and the cup is going to overflow. Now that's such a huge compliment to aspire to reaching that level of our potential. Wow, right? And they make this beautiful call for us to ceaselessly strive for the betterment of the lives of one another as we are wholly reliant on the invigorating potency of the Word of God, that unifying force, the mover of souls and the binder and regulator in the world of humanity. Wow. So, in terms of our activity for the past year, the Universal House of Justice, I think, is giving us really good grades on our report card here. And it's not just that we're getting this really big pat on the back, but we're also getting this incredibly uplifting shower of inspiration. And then in the final paragraph, the House of Justice focuses on the state of the world. Now, we spoke about this earlier in the podcast, but we spoke about it in the context of describing the state of the world. But the House of Justice goes beyond this. They are addressing the very dark conditions in the world today with us for a reason. And specifically, I believe, it's to help us understand the urgency of the hour. And this really is much of the real takeaway of the entire message. This message is an appeal for us to understand that our efforts are needed now, that we have a year left before the end of the first phase of the plan, and that our work now will set the stage for the next phase. So you feel this sense of urgency here. And personally, the way I read this message, this urgency is directly tied to the state of the world. So there's much for each of us to meditate and reflect on in terms of how we can best respond to this call of the Universal House of Justice. How can we rise further and dedicate ourselves further to our beloved faith and to the challenges of society building? And in praying for our success, they close with these beautiful words. For this we beseech the sovereign Lord. For this we implore his unfailing aid. For this we entreat him to send forth his favored angels to assist each one of you. Wow, how beautiful is that? I mean, just visualize God's angels are being sent to assist us. I mean, doesn't get better than that, right? Now, there's a lot for us to reflect on here. Reflection individually, as families, as groups, as neighborhoods, as communities, and as clusters. So take this message with you to all of these reflections. And as is our new practice, I end each episode with a song summarizing many of the themes we explored in that episode. So today, I've put a song together for you focusing on the Ridvan message of 2025. Remember, although the lyrics are mine, the voices, instrument, and musical compositions are all AI. So stick around after the episode for our song, and if you'd like to listen to more of my songs inspired by Baha'i ideals like this one, check out my collection at BahaiTunes.org. So that's it for today. Thanks again for joining the conversation for social transformation. Join me again next time as we start our journey of using case studies to better understand what social action looks like in practice. That's next time on Society Builders.
Through the shining example of noble endeavor, filling more and more hearts with hope, weaving new patterns as we work together in a world that is truly broke. Against the gloom of a stormy sky, even as the tempest rages on, our bright light gleams as we testify to the victories of the years. There is much to do, we're needed now, you see. It's the urgency of the hour, building havens, sheltering humanity, creating patterns designed to empower. Our communities are brim with potential as we learn through remarkable strides, because our efforts are so consequential. We unify in a world that divides. Just It's the